All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. We've had a reasonably busy week in South Africa, haven't we? Lots of shenanigans, as usual, from the ANC. National dialogue. Yeah, it's kind of a throwback to the old student days of Rhodes Must Fall for me. I mean, we're watching people have these hysterical moments, shouting at the stage, and that tiny little lady, a white lady with a pixie cut, sort of talking to everyone like they're toddlers in a preschool. It was just I couldn't watch that. It was really, it was really a disorganized mess, and everyone's been picking up on the highlights of the lowlights with fights on stage, president falling asleep in the crowd, and so on. But I did think at the time that it didn't make a huge deal of sense for all of the liberal end of the spectrum to back out of it necessarily. But after having seen it in action, I think they may have picked the right thing to do, because it would have been a farce. But if they were there, like Vryheidsfront plus DA, whatever, they would have been a magnet for most of the hostility in the crowd, I think, because what the crowd are complaining about is they want more free stuff, they want less inequality, they want wealth redistribution, they want free services, jobs, all that kind of stuff, and it's all about the state granting it to them. So the DA could try and promise and say, yeah, we're outperforming the ANC in this and this, but ultimately what they're going to be doing is everyone knows, even people who hate the ANC very much, that they are much more committed, at least superficially, to redistributing wealth than the DA is. If the DA leans too hard into this, they're undermining their basic, reason for being. But I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if we put it into the bigger context of the tariffs, then we really start seeing what is going on. Because it feels, on the one hand, like we're moving into a new phase, because it's the first time in a really long while that international pressure is really playing a big role. I don't know how you feel about that, but on the other hand, it's just on the other hand, yeah, it's just the same old, same old. The DA is flip flopping around. One day they're endorsing the expropriation bill, the other day they're against it. But yeah, what do you think about that?
So that's kind of the issue here. Is I think everyone knows that you're supposed to feel the pressure from the tariffs, but previous week we got a comment from the national saying, we don't need to really worry about it. I thought, okay, that's peculiar. And the South African government's acting like it's not a big deal either. They didn't really bother until the last week to even say anything to the American government about what's going on. So I think that what's happening is that they recognize that it's an opportunity to divert resources and trade to the east, and it's what they're doing. And Brand South Africa, which is it's a state propaganda outlet for investors and so on. They haven't put out much for a while, but here's the issue. They went and sort of outlined this as a strategy explicitly, and so they're enunciating a state position on this, which is that we don't need America. Now there is one. So I try to have a go through like what stocks and indicators have been performing well or poorly, and interestingly enough, the mining sector has been doing just fine. They don't seem to be affected by this at all. Not or if they are, it's offset by good prices on the market. And this is despite enormous setbacks. I mean, I was looking at some of the stuff, like they had the Session Soldana line had 2 breakdowns just in the last quarter, and Kuba Iron Ore, they've been doing funny shit like stockpiling. So because they can't actually have a functional lean logistics chain anymore because of the breakdowns on the line, which they're desperately trying to lobby the government to fix. So they're like stockpiling ore at the at the port. And it got to the point 2 years ago where they actually couldn't stockpile anymore and they reached capacity. But so they started cutting production. And despite this, I mean, everyone's posting record profits. The banks are posting great profits. The mines are posting great profits, right? The only people that are hit are manufacturing and agriculture. And okay, Wandile Sihlobo gives his usual rose-tinted view. He goes like, okay, we are hitting great crops in the grain. Everything except barley is expected to be up. Everything. And then everyone's going, okay, well, we've got access to the stone fruit market in China. They're already buying our citrus and our avocados. The biggest hiccup in our trade market has actually been from pears and apples, because they're much more sensitive to supply chain disruptions in cold storage. So now you've got this thing where we recently lost R1 billion to fruit going fraught at the port. And my impression of this whole pattern of business here is that the only people who are really worried about this is kind of the Western Cape agricultural sector and the Eastern Cape manufacturing sector. But what are those combined to produce? That produces a situation where you've got a massive collapse of core jobs in the Eastern Cape. Okay, so more immigrants to the Western Cape. And you've got a collapse of businesses. You've got a sort of crimping business environment in the Western Cape, which is bad news. And, it means being bought out by more foreigners, right? Dutch, Germans, British, Chinese, doesn't matter. So I think actually the biggest losers of this tariff battle are the Western Cape. And the rest of the country and the state are looking at this as a golden opportunity. That's what I see. And it doesn't look like there's much upside to this from the American strategic perspective, because they haven't really thought that they're putting a big sticker on South African goods, but they're not targeting industries, because I think that, the ANC are not actually as stupid as people think. The dependence on platinum group metals, sure, we're moving away from catalytic converters and everything, but we're still producing catalytic converters at a global scale. So platinum and palladium and all those things, they're still necessary. And then we've got like huge ferrochrome exports. I mean, people still got to make steel, manganese, people got to make steel. So we're looking at a situation where the core economic elite are untouched by the tariffs. And the people who are not doing well are the people who would challenge the government. So it's like it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me that the ANC would even care. Sanctions against South African officials, like individual sanctions, they haven't come through yet. They're just being threatened. So until they actually bite, the ANC are going to act like nothing's going on. And I mean, I don't know if it's going to hit like the media or anything. I mean, there was that article that I sort of posted and wrote about on the Indie just the other day. Came from a thing called National Security News. Now, the people running that outlet are a couple of veteran journalists who've been working for like 30 years at a fairly serious level. And then a couple, a cybersecurity and a financial intelligence professional. All right. So like these are not nobodies. And they sort of say, okay, well, some of the guys working on the South African sanctions front is complaining about News 24 working with the state and disrespecting basic journalistic standards. So I thought, cool, that's interesting. This raises an interesting possibility for if they go for personal sanctions, maybe they'll go after News 24. No one likes News 24. And I mean, recently they just did just today, they did like a hit piece on Willem Petzer.
Yeah.
And what's his name? The Vizigrad 24. And
I wonder how they make that connection.
Well,
But
no,
this,
Petza's actually no. Petza's like he's friendly with the guy with the Visegrad 24 guy. I mean, they've hung out. They're chummy, and the Visegrad guy, I can never remember his name, but he's sort of done a round of attracting. Beg your pardon. Sorry for the coughing. Just got over a thing at the moment, and it's still tickling me. But what was I going to say? No, they've been scooping up a lot of local commentators, like non-mainstream commentators, to write articles for them. I mean, like you'll recognize some of the Twitter handles. You got like Rory Duncan, and you've got that Rieb van Janbeek guy, and so on. They all did little articles for them. I think I did one, but I can't remember. I kind of haven't felt motivated to write for them. So, and it's not that I have anything against them or anything. It's just sort of I've got a lot of work, and I don't know. I mean, the exposure I'm looking for is local exposure, mainly to sort of convince people down here to change their political perspectives, not so much the international sphere, because I think much more adept people than me are focusing on the international sort of dimension. The problem is, lacking substance down here. And to that, you need to shift people's perspectives a little bit. So unfortunately, it's tricky stuff and often very boring in some ways. But pointing people to things that are happening at the local level, very, very difficult. But yeah, no, this is what I'm thinking, because I mean, look at this thing with Iran. Okay, Mapanya. I mean, people can say can like start rumors about Ramaphosa doesn't control the government, and there's some truth to the fact. I mean, they misbehave a lot, and Masha Tile has been steering the NEC to reach out to the ANC, to the EFF and the MK. But I don't think something like this is completely outside of the president's wheelhouse. I think he was almost certainly aware that it was happening, and they're giving themselves now plausible deniability, saying, we didn't say anything, he went off on his own, he's a rogue. And then the DA plays into this narrative by saying, he should be fired, and he's not
that's
going to be
actually
fired.
interesting. If we bring it back to the tariffs, that's why I think the ANC is feeling a lot of pressure, because on the first point, it doesn't seem to me that they understand exactly why America is going after them. Because, like you just said, there isn't a big reason. The people who are eating the hardest are agriculture and manufacturing.
Yeah, it's a blunt instrument. They didn't sit down and design it finally.
No, but this is the thing. They came out and said, well, look, our exports are not a threat to the American market. And I think that is a big misunderstanding of why America went after them in the first place. And I think the Iran thing is very interesting, because why would Cyril say he did not authorize?
No, but he's poking them in the eye here, because what he's saying is, look, we know that the big reason for your sanctions is that we took Israel to the ICC.
Yeah,
everyone knows this is like one of the major triggers. And then there's other like little details that are not actually of enormous magnitude, but still matter, like, terror financing and, drug smuggling and human trafficking and stuff. South Africa is a big source for all of this. But Israel, I think, is the big one. Hostility to America is also important, but I think, America tolerates a fair bit of that. But Israel's kind of a pivotal one. And the case is kind of a threat to Israeli stability and foreign influence. Not stability, legitimacy and foreign influence. So I think that's the big reason they're going after them. And the NC saying we're showing solidarity with Iran. And I mean, the statements that that Mapanya issued were like pretty strong. They weren't just like, we've come, these are our friends. They said, we pledge political support and troops. I mean, you understand how mental that is.
Yeah.
So what they're doing here is they're actually saying, screw the tariffs. They don't matter. And I think that's actually what they're doing. This is my take, is I think they genuinely don't think the tariffs are an obstacle. They think they're an opportunity. because if it does squeeze the local market, even if it does have an impact on the local economy, what's going to happen is that it's going to increase the population's appetite for redistributive economic policies. And that's what the ANC wants, because it increases their control over the political economy. So, I mean, I still think of their suicide vest bill, which is which is what I call the land courts bill.
Yeah.
I don't think they're actually going to promulgate that soon. I think that's like their last element. I think what's going to happen there is that once they've set up the land courts bill, they're going to effectively create a living constitution that's completely different from anything that's ever existed in the modern world. Because if they implement that, what they've created is a court that can take applications from anyone on behalf of anyone on any issue to liquidate any property for any reason, can accept any standard of evidence or dismiss any evidence for any reason. Like there's no standards whatsoever, and they're all hand selected by the president instead of the JSC, and they all have immunity from all criminal prosecution except for domestic battery. Like you see what would happen. I mean, the second these people are selected, then it becomes a question of who can kiss their ass quickly enough to protect their assets or grab someone else's. They can't be prosecuted for bribery, and there's no ethical oversight. So they'd be creating a body of judges that are now more powerful than the executive branch of the state. Like really, truly extraordinary powers there.
I think it brings it into yeah.
No, I mean, especially in connection with the other laws that come part of the expropriation package, you know.
I want to ask you, just to bring into consideration the unconstitutionality of a bill like that, and what do you think the impact of that will be? Because you said before the logistics is the actual threat, that even if it is unconstitutional.
But yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that once it's in place, I mean, who's going to hold them to account? You can. The thing is, they have made it possible for you to go to appeal. Right, you can appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeals, or you can appeal to the Constitutional Court. But that process is enormously long and complicated, and they can just and if they process a lot of cases, and they're empowered to dismiss evidence on the basis of expediency and accept hearsay. So this is an extraordinary. I mean, it violates a lot of common law elements, but it doesn't necessarily violate the Constitution.
No, which, so that actually, there's two things in the Constitution, though. It violates locus standi. You need locus standi to initiate any court process.
Quite, so, but the reason I'm so sweeping in my generalizations is, look, if you look at the detail of the thing, right, it says that you know, I can make a land claim on behalf of someone else. That someone else may have locus standi, and I'm acting in their stead, right? So there's like that, right? Do you understand where I'm coming from? And then it empowers government departments to use this process. It empowers any group of people to have this process, and there's compensation for witnesses and so on to be determined by the court. So you can set up it's a really powerful instrument for causing chaos and intimidation and stuff. And because of the other laws in the thing, like the Expropriation Act, for example, you're expropriated before you're allowed to appeal. So that creates a particular circumstance in which you'll be stripped from your assets and denied the ability to really effectively appeal this, except by waiting for a court-appointed lawyer, right? So this particular set of circumstances and powers that have been initiated mean that there can be extraordinary amounts of abuse that take 10, 20, 30 times as long to rectify as they are to create. They've technically provided all of the measures that allow you to appeal, that tick the boxes constitutionally. But the logistics of actually going through the courts and dealing with these problems make it so that it's, and I mean, the whole thing with hearsay, That's based on the idea of like African oral tradition. That's what they're appealing to.
Yeah.
So they've created a lot of really weird circumstances. I mean, like Jacob Zuma did some extraordinary stuff himself. I mean, he handed traditional leaders in this country power of summons, like courts do. So the sort of complication of the traditional tripartite understanding of the liberal constitution, I mean, it's already been eroded, and so these sort of peculiarities they're not going to function. I strongly suspect that it's going to be a disaster, and I think it's also going to be something that the ANC won't be able to control by any legitimate means. So once it gets started, once the ball gets rolling, it sort of becomes a runaway train, and you get land seizures and all kinds of stuff.
So I think that brings us to the other part of the dilemma, because on the one hand, if it's not constitutional, we're looking at you don't have a right to a fair trial, and the locus standi thing. But if it is constitutional, if it's ruled that way, then they're doing something so radical, you essentially are going to start a civil war, because people are not going to
Yeah.
have the assets. They're not going to
But
give it
that's
up.
why I call it a suicide. That's why I call it the suicide vest, because I don't think they actually plan to promulgate it for a couple of years still. I think it's just going to sit on the president's desk until he reckons it's time to go.
How long do you think after Trump?
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I don't think Trump is the deciding factor here. I think the deciding factor is the economic conditions of the country, because what we have is a situation where the fiscus is headed for a massive cliff, and no one's got any solutions to this. I mean, you see the best that the DA's got is stuff like, we'll instead of taking 2% VAT, we'll take that money from like a fuel tariff and then taxing people's medical aids.
Yeah.
And then we'll save like 16 billion over here by trimming that edge of that public department. And so the ANC's understanding of the seriousness of the problem they face is like minimal. Look, Moletsi Mbeki, on the other hand, has said, yeah, we need to strip 30% of the budget out. That's the figure I gave a few years ago. So when I've been rattling on it, you just need to strip 30% of the budget out. Just get rid of it, right? And you need to pay off your debts, get clear, get the economy rolling. But that's not going to happen, and the DA doesn't even want to advocate for that for some reason, right? So they put the Mbeki family is outflanking the DA to the right. I mean, it's mental. And, I think what's actually happening is that this whole set of legislation that they've put together is because the ANC knows that the end is nigh, and the way to preserve power when you can no longer pay your civil servants and your military personnel is seizing assets. So you liquidate the economy, you kill the golden goose so that you can make sure people can eat long enough to stabilize the political economy and then let investors buy the dip. Zimbabwe, right? It's exactly the same way. Falls apart, sees, your welfare spending goes through the roof. Your civil servants' salaries go through the roof. You can't pay your debts. You default on them by printing money. Printing money doesn't pay your civil servants and your military, so you give them packages of farms and factories and things like that, right? An economy goes to shit, but because you're now the most organized element of society, the state, you can survive and you have no competitors, so you're going to be fine. And I think that's the main thing people forget is, they think the government is held up by the weight of, economic performance, but that only goes so far. If you're the last man left standing, you're the last man left standing. It doesn't matter how short your stature.
The big question for me is, if we are heading to collapse and looking at a de facto partition of the country, what role are our trading partners going to play in that? Something like China or the EU, when the country does collapse.
I think the problem is everybody wants South Africa to stay together.
Exactly.
That's the horrendous problem, because they benefit from it being a miserable shithole that doesn't function. because you can look. I mean, it's not like people stop trading with Zimbabwe; they just stop paying taxes and signing forms. So, and it took a while for all of that to come back. But I mean, past 10 years has been, since Mugabe's gone. Well, it's not 10 years; it's like 8 years. But last little while, people roll into Harare and they sign deals and they put bits of factory down and they buy metals and so on and they ship them out. And it's going on. There's an economy there. Just there's no meaningful government implementation of development policy or law and order. Well, it's not necessary.
So we're essentially looking at two timelines, possible timelines for the country. The most probable one is where we are still heading for collapse. We still have to invest in state proofing, potential, get ready for a partition and stuff like that. But then I want to ask the more optimistic one is where someone like Rob Hassoff is coming in. And I think that is actually a massive topic that most people are ignoring, or, they're very optimistic about it. Because I think he's taking a page out of the Solidarity book, because I think he sees that there's success in bringing international pressure to South Africa. Now, whether or not the ANC is going to bow down to that is still an open question. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Hassoff, and especially the ANC considering MK and EFF for a coalition? I think that is another big factor.
Well, look, I'll say this: I've been very critical of Rob Hassoff, but I spoke to him after the criticism, and I'll give him credit. He's been very patient and taken me in good humor. So I've got to give him some respect for that. But I still disagree with his basic stance. So he reframed things a little bit better for me, gave me a little bit of clarity. So as I said in the article that I wrote on this long-term vision of the DA and merging with the ANC and so on that they've had since 2012, picked up from DA sources, no less. The trail of breadcrumbs that led me there was Hassoff's sort of role that he played in hooking up the EFF with British and South African elites, but apparently he did it at the behest of oh, bugger me, I can't remember the fella's name. The guy was running Brand South Africa for like 15 years. Brand South Africa, propaganda service for the national government to boost trade and investment. It was erected so that they could effectively lobby for the World Cup, right? I mean, they're an important source. I mean, you really get to see what South Africa is trying to sell to the global elites there, and they are saying, okay, the tariffs are actually not much of an issue. We're increasing our trade with the rest. It's a strategic choice to ignore America because we want to diversify our trade partners. So this was the outfit that sort of helped arrange a meeting between, British and South African economic elites, representing the Brenthurst Foundation and Chatham House. Okay, and the previous sort of plan, and this is one that Rob Hassoff kind of backed as well when it came out, is you soften the DA's stance so that it resembles the ANC's, but you have a better sort of governing record, and that's what they did with Mmusi Maimane, right? They went ANC struggle messaging, but more westerny. We're doing our good job. We're not stealing. And then on the other hand, you've got the split happening in the ANC from Malema. And this is where the strategy actually comes from. Is Zille looked at Malema's reaction to Marikana and his total 180 on Zuma, where he says, no, this happened on your watch, you've got to go, this is unacceptable. And I agree with Malema on this, is that was an unacceptable display of just incontinent behavior by state security. Like, sure, you have to round up those wildcat strikers because they were killing people, but executing them at point blank range, it doesn't really it's indiscipline. You didn't have to do that, and you're killing people who probably didn't participate in the violence, etc., etc. But Malema turning on the ANC, this was like, oh, okay, well, there's a real radical element of the population who wants to vote for this stuff. If you split them off with the ANC, from the ANC, then you've got this sort of like reasonable column within the ANC we can do business with. And at the time, the ANC was, the DA was saying, look, we don't mind doing business with Jacob Zuma as long as we get to help them implement the National Development Plan that Trevor Manuel came up with. That was literally Helen Zille's words about this, right? We love Jacob Zuma. He's great. Just let us work with you. And Rob Hassel's reaction to recently, because he comes back to the country in 2017, and shortly thereafter, you've got what's his name? My Money fails. He loses a chunk of the white support, actually all minority support. Not a huge chunk, but significant enough to warrant a report. And then you got Michiel LaRue coming in, and like Michiel LaRue, who's backed the DA for a long time and is like in close conversations. I mean, that Chatham House interview, Helen Zille was singing his praises, and then and sort of saying, "Oh, he's been so unfairly treated by the government." This is Capitec Bank, right? So what happens now under Neon Schreiber, is doing digital ID and doing it in partnerships with the 5 big banking cartel members, right? You know, ABSA, FNB, Standard Bank, blah, 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 right? And I mean, they openly announce that they fix prices against each other, right? So the profits they're extracting from the economy are based on the fact that they've basically got a stranglehold over the whole thing. And Capitec, even trying to enter this cartel, had their prices rigged against them. There was a lot of market manipulation from the other 4, but now they're in the club. So, you know, but now they're getting a chunk of the pie. They get all of the informational intel that comes from Home Affairs records, and they get a chunk of the fees for processing. And it's just such a fantastic deal, you know?
Yeah.
But so you can see the relationship between these people is very tight. But Rob Hasselhoff, to return to the main point, his sort of thinking is not quite like the DA, because he watched my money bite the dust. And he still figured, like much like the Oppenheimers have for the past few years, that getting my money and people like Zongeza Zibi and Roger Jardine together, you can eat away at the sort of, you know, clever blacks, as Jacob Zuma would call them, by providing them alternatives to the ANC. In reality, it's kind of taken a bit of the minority vote, a little bit, but it hasn't really gone anywhere. And where he is now is he's saying, okay, well, the PA and the Vryheidsfront Plus and the DA have to get together because the DA are wet and they've been ANC-ified, and we need a more hardcore coalition. The problem with this is obviously the thinking that, well, because all South Africans are actually kind of reactionary on crime and we all want the same problems fixed, that we're all of the same mind politically and we just need to see the right option in front of us. I don't see it. And especially now that Gayton McKenzie's got into hot water over, you know, racial slurs. And like, I think he was in the right, in the sense that I've read those tweets. Most of the time he's either citing someone else or he's being tongue-in-cheek or whatever. He's not sort of denigrating black people. And I mean, he's half Sotho himself. So it's like, what do you really think is going on with this guy? Do you really think that he's attacking his mother's bloodline in public? No, that's not what he's made of. But it has shut off the black electorate to his ambitions, right? So now he can only consolidate the colored community. And that means that his only path upwards is through Cape Independence now, whether he realizes it or not. And this is where Rob Hasselhoff becomes actually a very reasonable partner amongst the elites, is that I can't remember who told me this, but they had a conversation with him, and Hasselhoff tells him, well, he'll back Cape Independence if Mackenzie's behind it. I don't know why Mackenzie is so important to him. I don't like Mackenzie. I don't think that he has fundamentally reformed since his gangster days. He's
Well, I
clearly an
think
extremely intelligent and talented politician. That goes
the
without saying.
charisma, you have to take into
Yeah.
account the charisma.
I mean, this is the thing. He's actually right. I think Hasselhoff's right about that. I just don't like. I don't like the corruption that I see when I look where the PAs had their hands on the tiller, like Beaufort West. I don't like it. So for my money, it's I feel I'm kind of. But I mean, look, you take what you can get. The same thing happened with Fadil Adams because he starts going on about how comfortable the colored people are with being racially edgy. But people don't understand colored people's discourse on the matter. I mean, my understanding of the colored population is that they're reactionary on all questions except race. They're actually very pragmatic and reasonable on race, and they don't believe in racial essentialism. I haven't seen any. I haven't met any
Well,
colored person who's a racial essentialist. They
so
tend to be. They tend to be this thing. They tend to have this thing of they don't like their, ground encroached on. Sure, but the kind of hardcore, the sort of essential stuff, it doesn't seem to come through for me.
So for me, I think I can only speak from the Boerland perspective or the Cape Winelands
Mm.
perspective. Is that in my own experience, and I have quite a bit of experience with colored people, is that they actually are fairly race essentialist relative to blacks, especially migrants from the Eastern
Do you
Cape.
reckon?
Yeah, well, this is anecdotal, so I'm
Hmm.
not going to be able to
Yeah, I suppose we
say
have
this,
we have
but
slightly
this,
different social circles and experiences. So
yeah, well, that has been my experience, but I think it's a good segue into gaining ground in the Western Cape, especially um, unseating the
it's
ANC
true
member.
though. But you bring that up, but again, what I've been seeing so far is he's been attracting colored voters who were voting DA. Because I mean, I looked at there was a bunch of by elections I saw from last year. I haven't had a deep dive into the new by elections, but the ones that I saw, it was something like 3/4 of the support that he took in new by elections
Yeah,
was from former ANC voters. So it
exactly.
seems to me that I mean, look, he is a threat to the DA. It's not. Let's not kid ourselves. But because I mean, the DA's margin is only 5% in the province. But I think he's more of a threat to the ANC. And what he'll end up doing is he'll create a system where if he presses hard enough, he can become the official opposition in the Western Cape. And that could be a big sting for the ANC.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect timing for his tweets, his old tweets to come back,
Mm.
especially with
No,
him
it
gaining
is.
ground.
No, it really is. I think, but the problem with Hassel's model, and for the national level, I think, is that he keeps pushing on this idea of trying to get rid of the ANC, and I really, really, I wish I could convince him. It's not possible. Like if you expand your definition of ANC to include MK and EFF, they're not going
Yeah,
anywhere. They have a super majority. The movement has a super majority. And the fact that the NEC have opened up GNU discussions to the MK and the EFF means that they are not going anywhere. In fact, they're going to gain ground again. And when they come into the GNU and you have a full, serious GNU, what is the DA? I mean, they're not much now. What are they then? They're nothing. So the DA, once that happens, they've lost the main story that they have, which is that they can get into government. And this is something that they saw in the metros, right? And I noticed this last election is all 4 metros where they won in a coalition in 2016. The next election, they lost all that support, all of it. So what I'm seeing is that people see chaos and ineffectiveness, and they say, I voted for the DA expecting a change. Nothing changed. And the ANC will play with people's memories and say the DA wrecked the budget. The DA didn't wreck the place. Okay. They just didn't have the power or the ruthlessness to change anything. And they got undermined by cadres in the Metropolitan Civil Service because they didn't fire these people. And so they came up with a new strategy, or tactic rather, in Nelson Mandela Bay, where they operated through the legal office and expanded evergreen contracts. So by expanding the evergreen contracts, they don't need council approval, and they can just loot. They don't even have to be in the government. And in the meantime, they can disrupt the DA and make them look like they aren't in charge of their own coalitions. So at a national level, we're seeing a similar thing. DA don't have control of their own departments. They're forced to push ANC policy. They're trying their best to appease the ANC and the ANC voters, while trying to also allay the fears of their own voter base, which is becoming increasingly difficult. And now their options for expanding are closing, and nothing's gotten better. So what is happening? I think what's going to happen is that the DA are going to lose support, not because people are going to switch parties, but because minorities are going to become disillusioned and they're going to stay away from the ballot box. That's what I think.
So you think they're going for a state-proofing approach, rejection of party politics overall?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen. But I also think at the same time that Solidarity are not moving fast enough to state-proof. It brings us on to actually an issue where they can intervene, which is the new Bella Act policies that are being implemented in the National Gazette, because they're delegating powers to the heads of department to control admissions, the provincial heads of department to control admissions to schools. I mean, that gives a lot more, that delegates a lot of power from a national department that can't make decisions to corrupt little people who are looking to make their stamp on the world in a bunch of provinces which are controlled by the ANC. And it also means that the DA can't hide behind the ANC anymore and are now in control of more things. And they're subject to more scrutiny. And I mean, that forces you in a couple of directions. I mean, let's say you're in Gauteng and you have that nasty bugger, what's his name, Chana or whatever, in charge of the head, the education department in that province. You're now going to have to deal with your schools being wrecked by having admissions flooded. So where do you go? Well, you can go to private schools, but there aren't a lot of low-income private schools in Afrikaans, for example. I think Solidarity should really be making a move to seeing how quickly they can set up basic requirement private schools, because that would be a game changer. You know, the people who can afford to move will move their kids to the Western Cape and they'll be okay. But, you know, things need to change.
I actually want to backtrack just for a second. Another problem for Herzog is that his outspoken support for Israel and his support for Gayton McKenzie, it has kind of coincided. If you look at a lot of the pro-Palestinian Cape Townians on Twitter, when they call out Gayton McKenzie, they're always posting some photo of him with an Israel flag behind him. So
yeah,
a lot of Israeli support or people who are pro-Israel are also pouring support in for Gayton. So I think
true.
that's another thing that's going to.
It's a problem in that you've got this foreign conflict that's now affecting our local politics. I really hate that. I don't like having people form partisan divisions based on something happening overseas. It does my head in. It really does. I can't stand it. And ideally, what you'd have is, ideally, I mean, you know, if the South African Jewish Board of Deputies wants influence, they should just ask for silence. I think this is an enormous strategic blunder on their part, because if they're making politicians, I see this in America as well, they're going way too hard on the pro-Israel stuff. So, I mean, look, from a strategic point of view, and I mean, because this is not my, it's not my monkey, not my circus, you know, this is not my country. America's not my country.
Yeah.
And Israel's not my country and whatever. I'm just going to look at it in purely descriptive terms, no sort of moral judgment attached to anything. But if the Jewish lobby wants to be serious about this, what they should be asking for most of the population is silence. because what's happening at the moment is this is the amount of attention that they're drawing to themselves through their influence is stoking anti-Semitism. So if they really wanted to get on, they need to look like they're not doing anything, like they're not influencing matters. Because the more it's visible, the more they attract people's resentment. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems foolish.
Yeah, so essentially, that is another big question I think that has been ignored by a lot of the Cape independence discussion, is that effectively we have a proxy war, not only in South Africa, but in the Cape. There's a lot of Jews who live in the Cape. There's a lot of
Yeah.
pro-Palestinian Muslims, Cape Malay. And that is another thing to take into consideration because of the ANC support for Palestine. A lot of the
Mm.
Cape Malay are
Yeah,
not
and
very happy
the
with
DA's
something
support
like
for
Cape
Israel. I
Independence.
mean, the thing they
Yeah,
have, both of them have followed this sort of partisan division in international politics. That, I mean, forget Israel. I mean, Ukraine and Russia, for example, China and Taiwan. They split along the old Cold War lines like 100%.
yeah, but I think it's Israel Palestine to really the
Yeah,
central
no,
focus
true,
of the
true,
Cape Townians. But
true.
that's it's interesting. Another thing, I think this is a good segue into the whole Cape independence discussion. Is essentially the weakness you're describing with the DA and Rob Hersof's plan is that in South Africa we have kind of a dilemma in party politics that if a party wants to gain votes, either they have to change or the voters have to change. Now we have seen that the voters almost never change, like the ANC, the MK, and EFF together, they have kept about 60% of the support over time. So the DA and the Patriotic Alliance and any other hash of plans really rest on that assumption that they can change the voters, they can change the expectations, but essentially they're just going down another path um, to bring about another ANC situation. So
And I
I
mean,
think,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it
and
ends
that,
up being containment because what you're doing is you're selling this like based a reactionary message to people and telling them, okay, now go vote DA. Okay, now go vote for the same parties. Like, what's it going to do? What's it going to do? Nothing.
and tying this into the Bella Act, and especially this, what did you call it? This new power for the head of department.
It's a new regulation that derives from the Bella Act.
Yeah,
So they're devolving certain powers to the MECs, which
now
actually
I
is not a
think,
bad. It's not a bad move in for us because the more powers get devolved to the MECs and the HODs and so on, the more control the Western Cape has over education. Now, I mean, look, the DA has too close ties with left wing NGOs. They bring them in too much. They have too many lefties in the departments. But the difference is that we can influence them because we're their target voting demographic.
exactly.
And yeah, but we can't influence the ANC. So I'm all for it. Even if I don't like what the DA is doing, they do respond to influence. So
Yeah, I think you can look at it from two perspectives. The accelerationist perspective, especially for the benefit of the Cape independence movement, is that the more the DA puts something like Afrikaans under threat, especially in an Afrikaans majority um, province, the more important Afrikaans will become as a galvanizing factor for people in the Cape. And I think that is another thing that needs to be taken into consideration into the broader discussion of where the Cape independence movement is going. Because, um, as we just said, parties, either the party has to change or the people have to change. And in the Cape, we have the luxury of being a majority, a linguistic majority. And around that, if you press more on a new language movement with Afrikaans, that is another big push in favor of something like Cape independence, especially if every other avenue is not going to secure rights for it.
no, this is true. I think But I also think the appetite is sort of tepid here in the Cape. I mean, as usual, I mean, people here in the Cape, there's that sense of urgency, that sense of being under siege isn't as strong. So you're not going to get the kind of hard nosed lager mentality that you get in like Secunda, you know. But I don't know if I think it depends also on people's awareness. I mean, people not being aware of what their schools are doing with their kids, that's a problem. But I mean, how much time do you really have? I mean, look, okay, my kids are in like preschool creche, you know, so that I can work during the day and my wife goes off to her work and blah, blah, blah. And you think, okay, well, they're not doing much, but they're still doing stuff. And it's very hard to keep up with what's all going on at the school because they have lots of these little things. I mean, they're not meaningful things at this stage, but they're still kind of tricky to keep up with. And when you get to like high school or primary school or whatever, and then you're going to go like, well, what are they teaching them in civics class? What are they teaching them in biology? What are they teaching them in blah blah blah? That's hard to keep track of. I mean, you're going to sit your kid down and like say, "Oh, what did you learn today?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." You know, I remember what I was like. You know, you just, I mean, school's boring. School's very boring. So you just don't register as a kid what's important and what's what. And the attitudes creep in. And you don't know really what's going on with school discipline or how they're handling things. You need to be involved to quite a good degree to actually keep track of these things. And not everyone is. Some people are just too bloody busy. And some people are too trusting. So it's about bringing these things to people's awareness. And not every sort of outlet is willing or even capable of following these things, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. But I think that is the dialectic against something like the DA. That is the tension that is going to bring them either back to our side, back in line, or is going to, let the voters know that they're not on their side.
Yeah, the problem is the alternatives. You know, I mean, we've got the referendum party and the Cape Independence Party are currently having talks about a merger, which is fantastic. It's absolutely necessary, and they need to combine forces because, look, in my mind, both Jack Miller and Phil Craig have deficits that they can't get around. I don't think that. And I mean, look, I've said this to them directly before, so it's not like I'm speaking out of turn here. But Jack Miller doesn't have the sort of administrative, organizational verve that Phil Craig does, and Phil Craig cannot appear in public and be as sort of edgy and as authentic as Jack Miller appears to be. You know. So they have to, in my mind, they have to work together and they need each other. And I think Phil Craig realizes that he needs Jack Miller, but at the same time, he's not going to wait around. And Jack Miller, he doesn't, from my understanding, his criticism of Phil Craig, and I think it's a valid criticism in some ways, is that Craig is a bit of a liberal and that he at least appears to, from some perspectives, trust the DA a bit too much. I disagree. I think he understands where we are as a movement well enough to be making reasonable decisions and nudging the DA this way or that. And but it's difficult to really have that kind of popular effect, and we need colored support. And the problem is that
exactly,
the one colored party that supported Cape Independence previously is now what? It's the National Colored Congress, and they dropped the Cape from their name because they want to appeal to coloreds elsewhere in the country. They want to, they're wary of the white nature of Cape Independence leadership. And I mean, it's silly from my perspective because it's like from what I see it, it's like this is an easy goal, a wide open goal. This movement needs colored leadership. Just become the leader. Just say, okay, well, we're leading the charge now. Sorry, guys. and then it becomes a thing where we're going to have to ride on your coattails in order to get it done. But for some reason, despite this being like a prize that's laying out there in the open, they don't want to take it. I can't square this.
I think the problem is nobody has proposed that one unifying thing of why because every minority is facing different problems.
Yeah.
Whites are not facing this. Whites are facing land invasions, land grabs, especially farmers. But most of us who are not living on farms, who are not living in rural areas, we're not dealing with that directly. We have the luxury of not being close to a lot of plakkerskampe, so to speak. And on the other hand, a lot of coloreds are on the list for free housing and stuff like that. So I think that brings us back once again to something like language, because what else is there? And it's another thing that whether or not the other thing is a lot of people are worried about Cape independence. They're worried about what exactly it's going to look like. I think especially people on the AfriForum side of things, especially those in the Cape. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because whether or not you're for or against a Cape independence, or you're for something like a de facto federalist approach, where the state continues to collapse and the vacuum of power opens and you capture power via private means, at the end of the day, coming together around language is just going to bolster the entire movement, whichever way you're going.
Yeah, even if you don't actually get buy-in from everybody, it's at least sort of some common ground around which to form your position. I think the idea of sovereignty and autonomy actually, without those fancy words, they do actually appeal to ordinary people here across, across the divides.
And it brings us back to a very strange trend in South African politics, that outside of the ANC, they talk a lot about race and stuff like that, but something like the DA, they're just talking about jobs and growth and security. Nothing is really appealing to the people. Nothing is really appealing to things that people care about, especially those.
Yeah, I mean, that's my favorite paradox, by the way. As they all look at the polls and they say, well, which are the most important issues? Okay, jobs. Let's talk about jobs. We're going to give you jobs. And people are like, yeah, but we've been promised this for like 20 years. So it falls on deaf ears. There's no critical thinking about this. Everybody who goes into these polls says the same thing, because the poll's designed to elicit the same responses across races. Yeah. But what it ends up doing is just saying, well, what does every single person on the planet want? And now once you're looking at something that broad, it's not an organizing principle anymore. It's like, yes, exactly. We both want cake, but there's only one cupcake in the room. Or is one kind of way in which that doesn't work,
I think another...
And the other would be, what kind of cake do you want? I mean, if it's got peanuts in it, only one person can eat it, if the other one's allergic. So practically speaking, say you want jobs, but how do you want the jobs to come? How do you want inequality to be addressed? How do you want racial relations to be addressed? And for a lot of people, the answer is, well, white people must just behave. Colored people must just behave. Indians must just behave. And that's not a solution that the minorities can get on board with, because what we all see is that we're being mistreated as well, and we're being excluded and sidelined. So there's this fundamental problem that everyone has with these polls, is that every professional organization has to report something like tangible to their boss that say, look, there's a number. You can trust it because it's a number. But you try and bring some kind of qualitative rebuttal to this, and everyone sort of hems and haws, because the only outcome of this, which gives you something to hold on to, means referring to race and ethnicity, and people hate doing that. A lot of people really hate doing that. They don't have the stomach for dealing with that tension.
Yeah, so I think one of the disappointing things of the Cape independence movement thus far has been that they have essentially matched that mindset. They're talking about the economy, they're talking about border control, talking about tax. The approach is rather cold. It's very material, and the big question is like, why do we want this? Why are we here? Why do we live in the Cape and not somewhere else? And I think
Yeah,
there's a lot to be
absolutely.
exploited there because
No, I
yeah,
mean you made this point so eloquently on Twitter like a while ago, where you said that the solidarity movement, how they defend their positions, they don't say, "Oh, well, this number, that number, GDP go up." No, they say, "This is our home. These are our cultural characteristics. These are the things we love. These are the things worth fighting for." And this is why I mean, I think people are starting to come on to that a little bit. And for me, the bridging that gap between sort of meaningful questions of identity and affection and love and all of this and heritage, and then policy on the other end, you have to go into the sort of brute material zone, but you have to be selective in how you do it. So for me, it's land invasions are a nice cleavage point, but only if you tie it into other issues. So okay, for white people, we're losing our farms, we're losing the quality of our communities, we're losing housing prices, we're creating problems, crime, whatever. But for the colored community, it's also an issue of okay, but we're being displaced and replaced,
yeah,
and on the other hand, it's also we don't have access to housing that we deserve because these guys have to get ahead of the queue. And then you've got all kinds of cleavage points because of this. I mean, for example, you can talk about housing is dual competency in the Constitution, but the DA hasn't tried passing a PI Act for the Western Cape. So they haven't even tried to address the problem. The way they've been addressing the problem is feeding the crocodile, pure appeasement. Like, here's some free title deeds and utilities and whatever, instead of saying, well, actually, you have a home, you came from a home, go back to that home now. And because the PI Act, actually, if you look at the text of it, it actually technically refers to tenants, but someone who invades your property isn't a tenant,
yeah,
And so clarifying that for the Western Cape and then saying, well, yeah, this doesn't actually conflict with the National PI Act. It just clarifies it and insists that it only applies to people who are legal tenants and not to trespassers and land invaders who must return from whence they came. I mean, if you've got this perspective, then instead of paying for free utilities and new housing and everything, what you do is you put them on a bus and you send them back to where they come from, wherever it is, even if it's in the Western Cape, right? Eastern Cape, doesn't matter. You just send them back to where they come from. They go back to their mother's house and they got to try again. So, I mean, it's simple fixes like this where you've got like something tangible, and then the DA not doing it, you can say, well, you don't actually care about this problem. You're enjoying wrecking the province for us.
yeah.
This is
I think yeah,
because
yeah,
if
but
you can't bridge that gap, you're going to struggle, and people who sit too much in one or the other are going to suffer. And I think the problem with Solidarity and Co is that they're sitting in this "we love our community, we're looking after our community" thing. And I
yeah,
think
and
the
they
thing
have
is that
to.
when they know that when they look at that hard material policy dimension, that things start to get scary. And I'm scared too. I mean, I look at this kind of stuff. How would you put together a 5-year plan to gain territorial control in a couple of significant areas inland? It would be very contentious, and very quickly everyone would see what you were doing, even if you weren't being violent about it. And you're going to
Yeah,
be you're going to get a lot of heat from the government, from general society, from the press. It's going to be very difficult, but it has to be done. And it's that last sort of step. I think the thing is that also supporters of the movement get jittery. They're very jittery. They're very, very worried about confrontational stuff because they can feel that they're outnumbered. and helping people feel confident in that is very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the DA, well, politics has gone through a big transformation in the last 100 years. It's not always been about the hard material policy dimension. And especially when you look at something like communism or racial issues, inequality, it has that extra radical element. It's part of it, it bridges that stuff of life with, the policy element. And I think what's interesting about something like the DA is that they give off this vibe, this perception that support for them is going to be this one big fun, almost World Cup type feeling of patriotic, but then they don't offer anything there. It's just still material. It's still about growth. It's just still about jobs.
Well,
And I think
exactly.
that's,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
it's it's sort of Mandela rainbowism with Western characteristics.
exactly.
You know.
And they're not conscious of the fact that people just are not interested in that. And especially that's why I was laughed, because it feels like the DA type people, they're like the theater kids in school. They're not really the popular kids on the block. They're not, people aren't naturally interested in them in the first place.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, look at John Steenhuisen. I mean, look, he doesn't seem to be a bad guy by all counts, but he is
mm,
not. He's not a rabble rouser.
yeah,
And he's not a
well,
hard man. I mean, you look
I
at
think,
someone like Anton Bredal, and you can tell the guy's got some hard background, right? You look at Helen Ziller, and you can tell that she is not going to be pushed around.
yeah,
You look at
she's
John
a
Steenhuisen,
revolutionary.
and you could knock him over with a feather.
Exactly. Well, he doesn't have a spine, so
I think that's why they
that's
picked
his
him,
problem.
honestly. This is my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing about the Cape Independence movement. We should be looking at not just matching what the DA is offering, not just matching something like individualism or better tax policy or non-racialism. People don't really care about that, I think, um, unless it's specifically about them.
Yeah, I mean, look, the non-racialism thing is actually, I actually think it's vital because regardless of
It
how
is.
we end up, we are going to be a multi-ethnic state.
Yeah, of course, it
Mm,
is vital
Yeah,
as a principle, as a
yeah,
founding principle. It is very vital. But
mm,
I always think about it like this: Christians don't really care about religious freedom in of itself. Okay, they
mm.
they care about being able to pray to Jesus, being able to, you know, live according to their religion. So that's why they go out and make sure, if some other religion, if the Muslims are excluded, they don't really care that much. So it's very, very few people who actually, believe in non-racialism, believe in freedom of religion, believe in freedom of speech. So the
Well, I
approach,
mean,
yeah, of
I
course,
would sort of just clarify terminology there and say that not everyone wants to integrate. Um, it's just that they want to be left alone and not
yeah,
interfered with.
but that's
And I
exactly
think
the point.
that's non-interference. It's a very good point. Yeah.
Because of course these are fantastic principles and we do need them, especially in a multi-ethnic, multiracial Cape. We're not going to
Mm.
survive without them. We cannot repeat the past, especially in this international rules-based order. But at the same time, that's just something you clarify to a journalist. That's something you clarify in court, that we are non-racialists, that we believe in freedom of speech. That's not really the approach you take when you speak to the people on the ground about what they actually care about.
Yeah, because I think I think also the language lacks bite. I mean, take for
Exactly.
example, you want to end racial discrimination. It's much stronger saying, "Oh, we are for non-racial." Everyone says they're for non-racialism in this bloody country. It doesn't
Exactly.
mean anything anymore. If you say we want to end all racially discriminatory laws, end all race laws, it means something, and it gives you something to fight against. It's not, it makes me think of that. Sorry, I'm one of these silly, sort of silly buggers who read a lot of science sort of books for kids when he was little. But when you have the when you're looking at like a champagne bottle or whatever, you've got like where the bubbles form.
Yeah.
There's a nucleation point. If in theory you had a perfectly smooth vessel with no textural deviations in it, then the gas would remain suspended and evaporate very, very slowly away from the surface. But the nucleation point allows the gas to escape, and the same with crystals in supersaturation. They crash out when they've got a seed crystal, right? Without a nucleation point, you can't move forward, and so it's the problem with when you've got a message that everybody assigns to is that it's super saturated. There's no
Yeah.
point at which you can move from it. So the DA copying everything the ANC says, jobs, economy, inequality, we're for everyone. Yeah, everyone says that. It doesn't mean anything to you.
Yeah, just on a rhetorical point, because that's a basic idea in marketing. If you're just selling what everyone else is selling, why should they switch over to what you're offering?
Oh shit! Yeah, I mean, like, don't even get me started. I mean, like, one of the things I've been trying to do the last month or so is sell charcoal.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, okay, the sales commission's good, but the amount of people who bite are infinitesimal. I mean, you have this conversation with a guy in Dubai or whatever, and he says, "Yes, but I have already got a supply chain coming from Indonesia, so I don't really need this." And like, because it's just charcoal. I mean, like, I can say, okay, I've got Mashara, but then they go, yes, but why? And
Yeah.
like, okay, Mashara is like, poor man's Binchatan, but like, what does that matter? Like, not everyone's going to be even buying this stuff, and the people who want Binchatan want it to be expensive because it says, look at me, I can buy this ludicrously rare Japanese oak wood.
Yeah.
Like, that's what people want. They want it to be expensive. You tell them, oh, my
Yeah.
expensive luxury product is coming for cheap.
Yeah, a lot of it is belief sensitive, a lot of the supply and demand. But I think that it should give us hope. The fact that the DA is so lackluster in this aspect, especially when they're trying to match what the ANC is doing, because they're never going to be able to match that because the ANC has the revolutionary element to it that really does appeal, and they do have the African cultural element. So especially, there's a lot of opportunity, especially for the Cape independence movement, to do
It's
something.
true, but it's a lack of coordination. And look, money changes a lot,
Yeah,
but we
it
haven't got
does.
any elites who like Cape independence yet. Not one. So we're relying on like local businessmen, like guys whose businesses don't really extend outside the province or even across the whole province, who will chuck the movement like a little bit. I mean, no one's chucked anything our way, like the paper yet,
Yeah.
So it's still a situation where everyone's sort of doing this bootstrap shoestring operation, and it's very hard to get people motivated because only nutcases and autistic people are involved at this stage.
Very true. Yeah.
I count myself amongst those. I'm not sure which I am, but
You're a bit autistic. It's okay.
yeah, no, but yeah, no shit. I mean, the problem is you stare at all this low hanging fruit. So why aren't we picking it?
Yeah.
Why? But it's not going to happen until it happens. I have to. I want to quickly run down a couple of the more local items before
Yeah.
before we sort of continue ruminating about the bigger questions. So, where are we? Okay, well we've covered most of the stuff about education and so on. One of the things I wanted to hit was the problem with environmental activists, because there are a couple of organizations, Earthlife Africa and Green Connection and Natural Justice. Now, they share leaders. So Earthlife Africa has these two characters on board, Makoba Lekalekala and Liz McDade. Now, Liz McDade is also on the board of OTA, and she's also on the board of Green Connection. And Lekalekala is also on the board of Natural Justice, and she's also got some government position that I can't recall, but she's got some special government advisory position. Now, what they've been doing is that they've gone after a couple of things recently. So now Dion George, who I have a bone to pick because, I mean, the DA pushed through this ridiculously draconian Climate Change Act, and they're starting to implement now. They're doing carbon taxes. So they're going to introduce carbon taxes.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're starting with a thin end of the wedge. It's much discounted from elsewhere in the world, but it's still, meaningful. The bill empowers, the minister to impose any kind of emissions or production standards on any sector of the economy as a whole, any region in the economy, or any individual business. It's complete. He has as much power as like the economic departments of the Soviet Union. It's really extraordinary. Yeah. And but to his credit, what he's done recently is he's approved a new nuclear power plant. He's given them, so your environmental stuff is fine. And this is the Duinefontein plant that's going to sit next to Coburg. So that they can share staff and so on, because, skills, share infrastructure. And this is great because that means more reliable, cheap baseload for the Western Cape. Now, okay, capital investment's really big, but maintenance costs and fuel costs for nuclear power plants are actually not that bad. There's other problems, like, so people point at, like, okay, Lazard's levelized per unit energy cost. This is the one that makes stars dance in the eyes of Alan Windy. But I mean, there are a lot of problems with how they calculate, and they don't include a lot of factors. One of the biggest factors they don't include is the damage that solar and wind do to electrical grids. I mean, it's partially responsible for what happened to Spain when they had a blackout earlier this year, a national blackout. Is that these sources are very variable, and so power supply will drop or rise very rapidly, and it strains transformers. It can burn transformers out. I mean, look, load shedding has burnt transformers out across the country because when you switch on and off and on and off, it actually damages them a bit. So this variable current is not good news, but nuclear is fantastic. A very, very steady cyclical base load. And this is good news. But so these NGOs run by Lekalekala and McDade have gone after them. They've also gone after oil drilling. So Total and Shell have got there's this tiny little sort of comma-shaped oil field off the west coast above Saldanha, and they want to tap into that, and they've been getting approval for one thing, and then it gets denied in a court case, and then they get approval again, and they get denied. It's been flip-flopping a while, and it's these organizations, and I know Earthlife Africa is funded by a big American NGO, but their main funding comes from the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, which is gets 90% of its funding from the German government and is attached to the German Green Party. Jeez. And so, I mean, we understand what this is. The Germans don't want us developing our electrical grid. They've got to be in their bonnet about nuclear power for some reason that I can't pinpoint. But they've also been targeting our coal-fired power plants and our coal supply for those power plants reasonably effectively through constant, very expensive lawfare. And this has meant that, okay, the Germans have been increasing their imports of South African coal and coal elsewhere in the world because they destroyed their nuclear power and have had to fall back on aging coal-fired
Yeah.
power plants. It's really, really stupid, but that's the Germans for you. It's funny. I read a few years ago, Olive Schreiner's novel "Story of an African Farm."
No.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a classic in South African literature, written by
Oh yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you know the figures that they're referring to, I
Yeah.
mean, the young boy who Christianity makes him sad, and so he
Yeah.
becomes a nature worshipper, and his name's Waldo, so Waldo Emerson. The it's funny connection there is that so the Schreiner family were very close to the Smuts family, but the Shriners were they were Fabians. Um, Olive Schreiner actually fell in love with Havelock Ellis, the pro-pedophile guy who invented modern transgenderism and was one of the founding members of the Fabian Society. And but the interesting thing is that Smuts he had a big thing for nature worship, and he also based a lot of his ideas on the English transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Walt Whitman and so on. That's a big. I'm deviating from my point here, which is that the stereotype they make of the German character who works on the farm is, I mean, obviously he's a bright guy and he's very hardworking and everything, but he is so fanatically dedicated to these very sentimental interpretations of Christian brotherhood that when this Irish grifter rolls into the farm and the young girl in the farm spots that he's up to no good and mentions this to the German foreman, the German loses his temper and stamps his feet and says, I will not abide you saying these things about such a sweet man. How down on his luck. It is atrocious. And for me, this is like she just like distilled the essence of the German spirit for me, which is this sort of hysterical moralism.
Yeah. Rule
That
following.
yeah, like they've got some of the most fantastic, brilliant minds in the world. If you put them to like a limited problem, they're better than anyone else at solving it. But
Yeah.
if you give them a general problem, they'll pick the stupid option. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Well, the question
we
I have,
were.
especially because for me the green policy stuff is so alien to South Africa. I just don't understand the motivation, and I've been wondering, because you said a lot of it is based on international funding, is how much of this is like using South Africa as an experiment for to set a precedent for what they can use in other places. Because I don't remember exactly the think tank website I visited, but it's something with the Carnegie Institute, and they kept talking about setting an example for the rest of Africa. We have to invest in this in South Africa so we can set example for the world and all this different stuff. But especially with regards to the rest of Africa, I just do not understand.
I mean,
So
that's true. That's true. And I think, look, the Chamber of Mines down here and the Oppenheimers and all the big old players, they're still big Africa hands. So they've been pulling out of South Africa, but they've been going into like Kenya and Senegal and weird places like this. And you find the Oppenheimers getting implicated in politics in these countries occasionally if you Google them. Like, so now I make a point of not asking too many questions of this guy because he's a family member. But one of my cousins is married to a musician, South African musician, who's done fairly well for himself, but is a close friend of Greg Mills and the guys at the Brentos Foundation. And I don't want to put him on the spot or make his life difficult or anything. He's a very nice guy and all that, and he doesn't think very politically. But it's like they invited him along to help support that character Bobby Wine, who's trying to challenge Yoweri Museveni for control of Uganda.
No, but
yeah. And so you can see like the Oppenheimers, like they're kind of like getting jaded about South Africa and they pulled out and everything, but they haven't stopped being involved in Africa. They're like, we can make it work elsewhere.
Yeah.
And this for me is just like there's a sort of sadness about it that I can't quite express. It's very depressing.
Yeah, I started reading Harry Oppenheimer's biography. I didn't get very far, but I never knew that Jan Smuts was literally his childhood hero. So I think your Smuts hypothesis has a lot more going for it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have this thing of, for me, the reason Jan Smuts sticks out for me is that I don't think he was determining the policies of his day. It's that he had distilled the consensus. That's
Yeah,
what I think. Because what he does, I mean, if you look at it from a philosophical point of view, he distills all of the major scientific ideas of the time in a way that the best experts will say, "Yeah, you've got a total grip on this." Like there's a famous interview with Einstein where he said that Jan Smuts was one of less than 10 people on Earth who understand my theory,
jeez.
and yeah, and so he incorporates elements of general relativity, Darwinism,
Yeah,
German idealism, English transcendentalism, and English and certain forms of English liberalism and colonial trusteeship into this thing he calls holism, and this becomes a basis that, I mean, he sells a lot of policies on the basis of how things fit into this at the time. This is published in 26, but he was cozying up to Woodrow Wilson for and ended up getting handed the project of designing the entire constitution of the League of Nations. He gets
yeah,
brought in to negotiate between King George and Eamon de Valera for the partition of Ireland. He drafts the main substance of the Balfour Declaration. I mean, you understand the guys. He gets invited to help set up the economic boards and other departments of the UN when they get going, and he draws up the preamble. He quotes, Roosevelt on, freedom from fear, freedom from want, which is a very socialist sort of thing. It's like, okay, well, we'll provide you security and all the free stuff you could possibly ask for. But no, he's the globalist project as it is understood today is most purely distilled in the writings of Jan Smuts, I think, because there's this kind of patronizing sort of cosmopolitan colonial thing going on at the same time as a sort of utopian progressive at the same time. And that sort of weird synthesis of the two perspectives, that's where you find it. And also that sort of gradualist spiritualism. Because, I mean, you also get like characters like Teilhard de Chardin or what's that weird bloody theosophist called? Alice Bailey. Her followers end up stacking a lot of offices in the UN. So there's a lot of woo-woo. And I mean, look, Tony Blair and his family are also into woo-woo. I mean, they converted Catholic, but they're also into this funny sort of quasi Wiccan spiritualism and spiritual medicine stuff. So another big Fabian, Julian Huxley, who starts UNESCO. I mean, UNESCO's purpose, according to him, was to use the methods of science to create a new world religion. So then you
yeah,
also have under that the United Religions Initiative that tries to harmonize every religion's catechism with the UN's general goal. Like, what was that?
sorry, my dog.
Oh,
Shut up. Yeah, they're playing.
no, we're not doing much for the white stereotypes here with the dogs chiming in here.
Yeah,
The only way we could make it worse is if we were barefoot. But yeah, no, I think Smuts is really a key. And I mean, what was stunning for me though, the first time that I got a real surprise was actually reading Anthony Butler's biography of Ramaphosa, because he goes on this little tangent where he talks about the meetings that were held by the Oppenheimers and the Ruperts and so on in the mid 70s. And I mean, there's this pivotal point where, okay, the Progressive Party, Federalist Party is founded in 77, right? And it's in this year that you get all of the reforms and all of the changes and everything hits in 77, because in 76, Kissinger tells Forster, the game's up, start reform. You've got to keep the Russians pinned in Angola for now, but eventually we're going to have to give it a rest. And Anton Rupert, he gives this whole speech about about one man, one vote, and all of this stuff in 1976. In like a meeting with all of these people, and I mean it's transcribed there in the book. And I sort of thought, well, by the way, I just got a question in the chat. It says, any recommendations on ties between Smuts and the Fabians here? I don't think so. The only point of contact is indirect. So around the time that he wrote Holism and Evolution, there was a takeover of the Roundtable Group, of which he was a member, by the Fabian Society. I mean, it's now called Chatham House, this organization. And so Smuts is, I don't know if Smuts is a Fabian. I don't think he was. He criticized the socialists a fair bit. So I think he was sort of something in between. But no, I don't think there's any direct ties. But you might want to sort of have a look at Carol Quigley's book on the Anglo-American establishment, because that's got a lot of stuff around the formation of the Roundtable Group and their long-term influence up until the 1970s. So that's a very, very good point of departure. They also mention a lot on the Council of Foreign Relations and their ties and so on. And then the Fabian takeover is called the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, and I can't remember the guy who wrote that book, what his name is, but there's only one book called the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. You might find it tedious because the opening chapter is just why Marxism is bad, which we already know that. We're here because we know that. Skip the first chapter. So I hope that answers your question. Just read smut stuff. The good stuff will come up eventually. And Anthony Butler, as much as I have sort of silly emotional grudges from university days about the guy, his biography of Ramaphosa is really good. Like, you have to read it. It's full of great stuff, like really insightful observations. I don't know if he sees these insights the same way, but he captures their perspectives really, really well. So it was a good book, reading that.
Yeah, I don't know if we finished the green policy stuff.
So no, that's true. The last thing I would just mention is that they're going after the nuclear plant. So the main challenge they're going after the nuclear plant is that the two licenses that they're waiting for. I think one's a construction permit and the other one is a water permit. And so they're going to try and argue in the courts that look, everyone knows what the argument against drilling is. It's like, the sound waves scare the fish. You create a risk of oil spill. It's very, very standard stuff. You know what to expect. The thing with the nuclear plant is, okay, well, we know that the nuclear plants are actually safe. But Leka Lekala was like full of this hysterical nonsense. She said in a radio interview, and I almost pissed myself laughing, that she has fled to Johannesburg because she's afraid of her life if there's a nuclear meltdown. I mean, look, the International Atomic Energy Agency gave Coburg a 20-year clearance after their last refurbishment. They are fine. They're fucking fine. Excuse my language. And this sort of hysterical nonsense, they've got, look, you get less radiation poisoning from, a pile of coal, like a mountain of discarded coal has a higher radiation level than a nuclear power plant. It's ridiculous. And so unless you're stepping right into the reaction chamber, but that thing's lead lined, So no, so they want to deny them access to water rights because they're going to say, okay, well, Cape Town's water sensitive. This is daft. I mean, ideally, what the government would be doing to head them off is to pair the project with a desalination plant. I mean, that would just be. Can you imagine if they did that? We're going to put a desalination plant here as well, and just to offset the damages. That would have been cherry on top. I would have loved that. Because then you kill two birds with one stone. Huge benefit for Cape Town. No, it would have worked great. The only other news items that we have here are are a couple of local issues. Oh dear, I'm sorry. If you would excuse me for just one moment.
No problem.
Someone's very fussy. She just woke up. So, yeah. What I was going to say is that we're still pushing the court case with the court case of the Cape Town budget is still going ahead, but there are other reforms that Cape Town's sort of cracking down. I mean, I mentioned briefly the zoning law reforms. I mean, what hasn't been a few people have addressed some of the reform, some of the zoning changes to the CBD, but those are from previous council meeting. So, I mean, that's months old now. Planning to stuff 50,000 indigent people into the CBD where there were previously 3,500 residents. I mean, they're not going to be able to maintain the CID that they had before. So the quality of the place is going to go down the tubes. You're going to have a whole Joburg situation on your hands. But, you know, Jordan Hill Lewis doesn't care because he's redistributing money to the poor, property to the poor. And then he basically just says anyone who's suing them is like misreading the law because clearly he's in the right to raise tariffs however arbitrarily he wants, you know. And I think the man's sort of a little bit deluded because I've noticed he's like trying to get policing powers now that there's a new police minister acting Farouz Gachalia. So Nkunu told him to back off, and it's like, we don't care. Becky Cele before him tells him to back off. And so what do you think Farouz Gachalia is going to tell him? You know, I mean, he hasn't got any new leverage. There's not been any new changes. So
and the People's Bill, something like that is still on the table. It's still possible to pull that off, but they just ignore it.
Yeah, no, they refuse to do it. I mean, the thing is that it gives them too much power, and it gives legitimacy to Cape Independence, and then they're going to freak out. But seriously, I mean, the DA could take all of the wind out of our sails by just passing the People's Bill and then acting on it.
Yeah, I want to ask.
Oh, Jamie, gaan blaas daai ding elders asseblief.
Yeah, I want to ask how much of this comes down to DA factionalism, because I think we have somewhat real you know, we have a few realists, sort of, not really, but on the other side we do have this idealist kind of Leon Schreiber, Jordan Hill Lewis, and a few others who really are going full speed with everything they're doing. So how much do you put this down to the factionalism within the DA?
That's a good question. I think the thing is that the people who are lined up to lead are pretty solidly left. What's the big finance guy that they have? The little round Indian fella. Like very, very smart, sort of like encyclopedic knowledge of like all kinds of stuff, but I can't remember his name, but he's their main public finance guy, and this fellow is also fairly left wing, but has managed to avoid having any of his political opinions become public. I think it's like the whole cohort below Helen Ziller are quite left wing, and I always thought Helen Ziller was kind of like a right winger who's just like not very ideologically astute. But I mean, after that interview, there was an interview that she did, which I've mentioned a few times now, with Roman Kabernak and Jonathan Witt back on the Renegade Report in 2017. And she says, no, like she's not actually a free market. She doesn't believe in the free market. She thinks the state has a role to play, and everyone is learning that now. You know, like that particular arrogant way she is like, well, you know, I'm ahead of the curve, and you guys just need to catch up. and sort of realizing that the state has a role to play basically means the ANC are right about everything. We just need to get the corruption under control. And it's like, but it's this whole thing of, we've got to centrally control the economy in perpetuity and set our clock by international standards. So essentially, she's using liberalism as a way to create an international planned economy. That's her perspective. It's absolutely, it's incredibly radical. It's totally bananas, right? But yeah, no, I think the problem is that just there are no sort of center right successors there. There's the only one I can think of is maybe Celia's Brink, and then you've got Waters and Cameron. Cameron is he's a stud. I love watching him go. Just that thing that he did with the Mkhwanazi scandal. Emma, Muni asseblief. Muni klapni. So the with the Mkhwanazi scandal. Come on, sausage. Wil je mama toe gaan? Wil je mama toe gaan? Wil je oma toe gaan? Hey? Okay. Papa's bezig. Papa's bezig. Nee. I don't think I'm going to get rid of her, I'm afraid. But no, what was I going to say? I have having my don't. Good grief.
You're doing okay, Rob?
Yeah, no, playing with the cables. But what was I going to say? Yeah, no, I don't think the DA is going to get any right-wing support, sort of internally. I think that the people I think if there's a factionalism emerging, it's very quiet. I think they're a very united party. I think they're very organized. And I think they have, at the top, they have consensus that they are a left-wing party disguised as a center-right party. Ja, dankie, Emma. And yeah, I mean, their main threat at the moment comes from their own tactics. Let me just check. Yeah. And sorry, this is straining functionality. So I'm gonna have to hand off the children soon. But yeah, Lovey, would you mind taking her from me? She keeps unplugging my microphone. Okay. There we go. Okay. What was I going to say? It's still there, my man. No, yeah. No, now my brain. The thing is, when you've got a kid on your lap or in the room or whatever, half your brain has got to be on: is this child about to break something or themselves?
So like sabotaging your DA rant.
Yeah, it's like narrow bandwidth. But yeah. Look, I've always, I just, because
you're cutting out.
Oh, balls. Okay, well, let me have a look. Okay, that looks. All right, I think that should be better. Is it working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. No, because when the Mkhwanazi scandal hit, remember that the DA didn't want to make any statements. They were very quiet. But one person reacted, and that was Ian Cameron. And he stuck a message straight on the DA's page, and he went on Biz News like the same day, the next day, on the Monday, after that press conference in KZN. And he immediately jumped on it and made it an official DA position without speaking to anyone, from what I can tell. The reason I suspect that this is possible is because I read Nick Cleland and Ryan Coetzee's book on how the DA runs public relations and public communication. and they say that you have to let your officials, your trusted officials, make statements without consulting you. Because if you have to give permission to everything, you put these things through a committee process, you remove your capacity to react quickly.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I think that the rest of the party were hesitant is because for a number of days, almost a week, no one else actually mentioned it. It was just Ian Cameron who was even addressing this issue. And Cyril Ramaphosa's faction and his cronies, like what's that sort of dangerous Irishman? What's his name? Paul O'Sullivan. They were just starting attacking Nkwazi. And I mean, it's their only attack vectors. They have to undermine his credibility and finds dirt on him because they can't fire him or take him out because that turns him into a martyr and either gives him power or the MK power, for example, because the MK were very much behind the guy. So what the DA have done is they got behind the right thing of saying, yeah, we need to get rid of these guys and we need to press forward with prosecution. And he's been keeping up the pressure magnificently. He just does not give a damn about the factional angles. For him, it's just, we need to get the bad guys, which I admire a great deal because, frankly, what else is there if that's your reason for being? I mean, I'd love to see him employed in some capacity in an independent Cape. It would just be, he'd be the guy I'd call on. I'd trust him implicitly with taking care of policing issues.
Also, a fantastic speaker. When he goes out, there's no stopping.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's clarity, good memory, quick, no hesitation, delivery, plain speech. Plain speech is always good. No, I like him a lot. But when you're speaking of like problems in the DA, one of the biggest ones that I think they're running into at the moment is in the local politics. So, okay, they're struggling to control niceness, and are they going to put it on administration? The mayor, Orbit Senghor, got removed. And you think, okay, they're kind of moving forward towards getting things under control there. But then the guys who are connected to the ongoing more than a decade and a half scandal now in Garden Route, they're still cropping up in news stories. And these are people that the DA protected for years. So that story is still rattling on slowly but surely. The big one for me at the moment is this little trend that started a couple of years ago. And the only reason I suspect I know what's going on underneath is because of the one leak that they had, on what's going on, which is in Swellendam. So they started poaching ANC councillors across the province.
Yeah.
And then the ANC council stepped down, joined the DA, ran for a by-election. Now, I think the tide's turned because the last time that this happened, so I mean, the problem in Swellendam is they picked the only incorrupt ANC councillor in the entire country, and he says they offer me 2 million rand, and he says no, 2 million rand free placement for his kids at Paul Boys High. Don't know what the connection was there. But yeah, no. So that goes on. The Peter Groenewald reaches over and fires their speaker down there from the party, expels them from the party for causing a stink and making the DA feel bad. So I hate Groenewald. Actually, I think that was a despicable thing to do. I think he should be ashamed of himself, honestly, and I think he should step down instead of watering his own sinecure up there in the Minnesota prisons, which, yeah, great, you're tidying up the prisons a little bit, but no one cares. It's not going to change anything. And meanwhile, you're stymieing the party's ability to freely move and challenge the DA. And but with this strategy, it's worked in a few places, but the DA fell down flat when they tried it in Matsikama. Because what happened is they got an ANC councillor to cross over, but when they held the by-elections, neither the ANC nor the DA won, that the PA took it. Because the local population saw exactly what was happening, and they mentioned it in sort of like little field interviews that you found in articles at the time. And they say, no, actually, we're going to go with the PA, and both parties lose out. Now the ANC have managed to get 2 DA members in the Beaufort West Council to defect. One of them to step down, and one of them to vote against the DA in favor of the ANC. So now they've got an ANC mayor, despite not having a majority in the council.
Yeah.
And this kind of shenanigans is like when you start playing that game, what do you think is going to happen? And eventually, you're going to fall on your face. And the DA always think that they can play these games, but I remember. So there's another interview where I looked at a few years ago. Again, Helen Ziller, Biz News. So she mentions this white lady who managed to win a black ward in the middle of Mpumalanga. And I thought, oh, wow, I must really have a look at this. You know, must be someone special. No, it was a Afrikaans tannie who had been, you know, the allegations are that she was actually helping land invaders by helping them set up stands. And she didn't last, you know. Eventually, they kicked her out for something else, right? But it was patronage that delivered it, right? So it's like, yeah, we're willing to overlook your race, but then you must give us something, you know. And the situation in the Western Cape where they've got to do the land invasions and then the government comes and gives them free stuff, that's not quite the same, because in their minds they actually already took the land, and now, you know, you're just putting icing on the cake. So I think that's a big distinction. And I mean, their limits are demonstrated also in like Umgeni and wherever, where it's like, well, is the white turnout high, you know, staying at double black turnout, or is it not? Because you had record white turnout, and he, you know, Papas wins by a whisker, and then you have Jacob Zuma comes into town, and then both the DA and the ANC fall to MK in that board. Although, because it's not a local election, we haven't seen the result yet. But I don't think Chris Papas is going to be mayor in 2027. You know, it's only because that ward is 22% white that he can actually manage to hold it. But that's the DA at a national level. You've got this big, pernicious, persistent problem. It's just ethnicity.
Yeah, and they don't seem to be losing any steam amongst the normal voters. At least it feels like that to me. But I was
I agree with you.
I was a bit more optimistic when I saw the announcement of Brink on Twitter, because I expected a lot of DA fans to be, you know, to hype up the shit, and what you got, all the comments were negative, were critical of the DA, especially within regards to GNU and their hypocrisy in that whole saga. So the tides do seem to be turning, at least online, a bit.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think that what they've done is they've saturated the block, right? And I think that they've recovered some of the doubts of the people who, you know, last year they recovered some of the doubts of the people who left them because of Musi Maimane, right? So they took back a lot of Vryheidsfront Plus voters. But this was all predicated on the idea that they could save the country, that they could win and beat the ANC, because they sold them this multi-party coalition thing.
Yeah.
But they don't. That messaging is not available to them anymore. Now, there's a mitigating factor, which is that they've been able to convince people that going into business with the ANC is normal. They're gradually breaking that in, but what I think that's doing is it's going to gradually. I think it's going to wear people's confidence down. I don't think it's going to like radicalize anyone. I think what's going to happen is that people are going to get depressed, because they're going to say, well, yeah, obviously the DA is the right answer. It's the only option we've got up here in, you know, China or Joburg or wherever. But what are they going to do? And I think they're definitely going to get some good turnout for Johannesburg with Helen Ziller there. They're going to get, and I think it's going to have a knock-on effect on Cilliers Brink in China, because then you're going to have two DA heavyweights stomping around there, and there's a good chance that they'll increase their share. But I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as they're hoping for. I think it's going to be something. I think they're going to gain a couple of points, but I don't think they're going to actually stomp it. And I think what's going to happen as a result when they get into power is that they're actually not going to be able to change what they need to change in order to win and to make an impact. And so, and like Helen Ziller is tough as old nails, but if she cannot turn Johannesburg around, if she fails at that, she kills the party permanently. Like, it will wither up north. Not because no one sort of thinks they're better than the ANC anymore, but because people don't think they can do it. Like the battle's been lost. You know?
We skipped over something earlier. It's the
No?
news that you wrote an article saying that the ANC is considering bringing MK and EFF back into coalition.
Yeah, no, I mentioned it briefly a couple of times because I covered it a bit more extensively last week. But this is kind of the big cloud hanging over all of this, which is that, you know, if they get those two guys to come back into the government, DA becomes nothing. DA loses their actual point for existing, which is to steer the country towards a sort of quasi-liberal sort of lane. So if they lose that, it's going to be hard times because no one up north will care about anything, you know. And people still voting DA. I think the thing is that if that point comes where they realize that there's a hard ebony ceiling they can't cross, then what's going to happen is that you're going to see decline of white support. And it's not going to be dramatic. It's not going to be overnight, but it's just never going to pick up again. Like, people are just going to stop caring about politics and they're going to go into the AfriForum and Solidarity world. And the problem with that is actually that you do need support in the political realm for that sort of solidarity stuff to work. Otherwise, you have to do direct confrontation with the state. The courts only take you so far.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very difficult. That's going to be very difficult. On the plus side, it'll put a bit of energy into solidarity, and people's disillusionment with the country will hopefully manifest in some harder changes.
Yeah,
but it all
especially
remains
more
to be seen.
support for Cape independence.
Yeah, I mean, but I still actually hope that, you know, the anchors in the interiors can stay and function. I think they're actually, in the
Yeah.
very long term, they're actually deeply important. And
Yeah, I think that's
I envision a future where you have you've got preferential trade with products that are stamped in those anchor towns. So hypothetically, you have an independent Western Cape, and you say, well, look, we now strike a deal with Solidarity, and we're going to trade with them as if they're a state. So we're going to license a series of trade handlers, and they can charge fees or whatever they want in their town for any goods that pass through them. And if they're stamped by these people as meeting certain production standards or whatever the hell, then they get they get preferential trade. And you can do this, and if you want to stick to the non-racialist thing, then you can also do it with selected I don't know, traditionally governed areas. And you can say, like, okay, well, the Barolong Basaleka, we like them a lot. You know, if they've got any products they want to sell us, you know. So you get these sort of limited exemptions.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. We have to take into consideration that even if we want Cape independence, people are not just going to leave their ancestral homelands.
And nor should they. Nor should they. I think the fact that they're up north and the fact that they can become they can become part of a bargaining process for reforming South Africa,
Yeah,
what remains of it. I think that's actually kind of important because you can't be having another Zimbabwe on your border for the rest of time. It has to build back up. And for it to do that, you
exactly.
need competent people who live there who are committed to building things up and can keep themselves together in the face of revolutionary change. So I believe in it, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
I believe in the anchor time business. I know that Alan Stritz has kind of given up on it. But I think it's actually, in the long term, it's kind of vital to have a few trade links in the interior. And
I
they don't
think
have to be
so.
big. They don't have to be big.
I think
But if they can be
solidarity.
if they can be safe and
Yeah,
secure, you might even actually see remigration from the Cape to these places,
yeah.
and you might see them growing.
But I think the thing that is holding solidarity back is that they think the international pressure might be enough because they are
Mm.
making a lot of progress there in
Do you know who I
conjunction with
blame,
state
actually?
keeping.
You know who I blame? Tiens Earlof. All of that Dagbreek Trust stuff. I mean, it's this very sort of like liberal conservative position where the
Yeah,
guys are saying, well, no, we need to get on and be part of the community and everything. Yes, we are Afrikaners and separate, but we're also part of South Africa. And I said, no, the rest of South Africa doesn't consider you part of South Africa. They consider you as sort of a thorn, a parasite to be removed. And you're taking an appeasement approach, which is not, it's not the way to go. It's not the way to go. And I think the radicals in Solidarity who, like Koos Malone and so on, they're the ones that should be listened to, not because they necessarily, not because they're going to do anything scary. They're not going to do things that are necessarily scary. They have reasonable positions and they have actionable trajectories which to follow. And there are strategies that come with this that can transform your ability to protect your people and promote their interests, which is what you're supposed to do first and foremost. And they do it. It's just, I think that there's a risk aversion there, which I understand, but I don't. I desperately wish I could convince them to sort of, I don't know, move faster. I know I've got a couple of friends up there who are, they're moving the needle a little bit in the right direction, but it's little bit stuff, and it's a little bit hair raising because you're watching the water level rise, and people are still trying to bail out their living room instead of getting to high ground. And
yeah. I think this actually calls for a future stream where we go over the negotiations and especially the left, center, and right response with something like the group of 63, because it does add a big piece to the puzzle of, there is a tension between those who still want to be integrated within South Africa and those who want to, that, yeah, you want something like a partition, something like a bigger federalism.
yeah, I mean that was my other sort of big point that I've made a lot is you can't get federalism from the center. You have to pull away and force them to meet you halfway. And yeah, because if you're not, if you, who can control the center? No minoritarian group can control the center. And no black group really wants to break up the country that could get above 10% of the vote. So it's not going to happen. You have to actually threaten the dissolution of the country by pulling away from it in order to force the center to negotiate with you. If you can do that, you can probably get your federalism. But if you don't make the move to pull away, you've got nothing to bargain with.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on that note, I think we've been going on for long enough.
Yeah, I
Unless you've
think
got if you've got another point or two to make, please make them now.
we did skip over a very important story.
Mm.
No more beer discounts, something like that.
Oh yeah, no, they want to. They're instituting like Swedish style alcohol price controls to as a way of trying to close tax evasion loopholes for alcohol companies. It's just It's the same miserly approach that Kisveta has done with everything. The only story that I think we skipped on that's actually a major one is the story of the high-speed quantum connection between Stellenbosch University and China. So,
I'm very ignorant in that still. I haven't read the article, but
oh yeah, no, that one is. Look, from my perspective, look, it's there's like this little microsatellite called the Jinan 1, low Earth orbit, whatever, and it's the longest intercontinental quantum communication link because it's nearly 13,000 kilometers. But I mean, look, my perspective on this is, look, it's obviously state security, state intelligence related, and a deeply encrypted connection. And Stellenbosch has got the Confucius Institute. Stellenbosch has got all of these little Chinese connections going. I look at this a lot, and it's like, in the context of all of the other developments that we're sort of seeing after the tariffs, it strikes me that South Africa is actually taking what they're promising the public, which seems like cope to everyone in the commentariat. I think it's actually real. I think what the ANC are trying to do with what they're saying is actually real. Like, both on the front of describing the balance of forces in the tariffs, and on the side of, like, here's the strategic direction, we're actually doing something. I mean, I think people are underestimating the ANC now, and all of this stuff that you're getting from, all of the people associated with Robert Hasshoff, all of the people under his patronage. The thing with them is that they are posting cope. They're saying, look, the ANC is falling apart, the tariffs are going to crush you, all of this kind of stuff. They're not. They're shocking certain sectors of the economy a bit, but what's actually happening is that the Indians are now entering the car manufacturing market. Tata setting up a new factory, right? The Westerners are pulling out, the Japanese are pulling out, but India is coming in. China is displacing all of the local consumption. So these factories in the Eastern Cape, and in Johannesburg, they can't sell to the local market as much as they'd like because everyone's buying Chinese. And India's coming in, and they're doing good work in agricultural sector, right, for cheap buckies and things like that. So I think what's happening is that the whole economy and the political sector are pivoting hard to the east, and the ANC are actually winning this battle, and the West are having no effect. This is what I think.
Yeah, I agree. The whole BRICS element. People.
I mean, not the
really
BRICS is going anywhere. I mean, the BRICS thing, they chickened out from their whole currency de-dollarization project.
Yeah, what I mean is that.
But yeah, elsewhere they are winning.
They are making allies. They are making allies with China, Russia, India.
Yeah. No, because I mean, Donald Trump decided to give India a spanking because they're not respecting their trade embargo on Russia. This is not going to make friends with the guys, and I mean, you need India in your corner. If India decide that they're going to have a pragmatically a pragmatically friendly relationship with China, then you've got nothing. I mean, you've got this huge economic bloc and political bloc that can just nudge people away, and it's. Yeah, America's isolating itself accidentally, and Europe's pulling away now as well. So, they haven't got as much clout as they used to.
Yeah, it's a new multipolar world order, as the
cheesy. It sounds so cheesy to say it now. I mean, because everyone's been saying this cock for a while, but it's like it is kind of here. It's kind of here, and the ANC are well positioned to take advantage of it, even if the average South African is not going to benefit much. And I mean, Leon Schreiber is opening visa-free entry to Indians and Chinese.
Yeah.
So, congratulations. Uni party. It's actually so depressing. It's so depressing. And Like the phrase from Bliss, you've got the perfect platform, just can't find the energy to commit to fighting. It drives me mad. It really does. They got the perfect platform. I mean, I've still got my membership card stuck somewhere, you know. But
Yeah.
I can't bring myself to participate while they like this, you know, because there's no way to climb the ladder if you're not willing to play ball, unless you're Napoleon. I'm not Napoleon, you know. So yeah, I unless an opening comes up and something changes, I'm feeling very low energy myself. So yeah, I mean, I think for now it's all of us mukhus on the ground level have to get our act together. We have to help people understand the political system better, understand the problems better, and hopefully get people to put pressure on their political parties, on their and so on. I mean, eventually, I'm going to have to sort of strap my big boy boots on and try and put pressure on the Vryheidsfront, try and put pressure on the Cape Independence Movement, try and lift some weight for them.
What do you think is the deadline?
See, that's a good question. This 2029 feels a bit final for me. I get the impression that after that it's... And somehow the urgency is almost impossible to find amongst ordinary people. I mean, even once you get independence, let's say you get independence by 2030 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at a situation where you've got to now completely shift the demographic flow in your country in the face of enormous international pressure from what is likely going to be a Democrat-run USA, and you've got to find a way of doing a very draconian political reform while your neighbor is collapsing economically
and possibly sabotaging, because we haven't spoken about the...
Yeah, there's going to be that's going to be expensive, and I think look, I think people are going to their mentality is going to change dramatically if you're effective in getting rid of the gangs and getting rid of organized crime. Then people will be a lot more understanding of your crackdowns on political dissidents, violent political dissidents. But if you can't fix that problem quickly enough, you won't be able to do the other things. So it's like there's so many problems that have to be solved simultaneously once you get into power. There is no world in which you can do like worse than a 90% pure job. The second the Cape Independence is set up, mediocrity is failure.
Yeah. And
that's what scares me.
People really have to take into consideration what comes after Cape Independence. Because if the DA are staffing the next administration, the Cape Independence administration, it's really going to go downhill again.
So. No, and the worst problem is you're going to have to deal with them, which means in some respect, we have to find a way of making friends inside the DA, finding members of the party who are, influenceable. The problem is the way that a lot of those people will be people who hold seats in parliament or local councils, but they pick those people based on having a history of corruption so they can control them. So like several of these members that got recently pushed up to national and provincial parliament are people who have a history of corruption at a local level. So who investigations got quashed and they quietly stepped down before the investigation can proceed. They did that with Conrad Poole over here. They've done it with Memory Boyson, Eleanor Boas-Spies. There's a number of these characters, right? And they sit there and they'll do as they're told, So it's very difficult to deal with them. They're going to be a huge problem, a huge pain in the ass. And Tony Leon still controls the DA. Controls is a strong word, but has large amounts of influence over it. And his crew is like this little consulting group, which includes Nick Cleland, who wrote a sci-fi book about, not a sci-fi book, a speculative futurist novel about an independent Cape where everything functions perfectly, but you've got political repression. And so the people who want to go back to having an extremely badly run, violent, shit streak democracy are the good guys because the cost is too high. For having clean streets, no murder, jobs for everyone, and 10% GDP growth. Like the most extraordinary proposition I've ever heard. And like the fact that that's how they frame this is to me just the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life. And it shows you how deeply they believe in this pathetic, degenerate system that they uphold, is that they would rather have it this way than have people be able to live safely and securely and have a future for their children. They would rather see Zimbabwe as the future and be able to call it a democracy than get on the road to Kigali, and have Kagame's sort of hardcore system, which just works.
It's justice though the heavens may fall. That's how they see it.
Oh, it's a great phrase. I haven't heard it for years.
Have you seen Snowpiercer, the film?
It was. I've seen bits and pieces of it over time, and it makes me cringe. The entire conceit of the film makes me cringe so hard. It's so stupid.
So it's made by Bong Joon-ho. I think you know who that is.
Mm-hmm.
Very famous South Korean director, and that is actually the if I'm going to spoil the film, but that is the central message of the film. Is that in this a post-apocalyptic ice wasteland where the only chance to survive is on this train, they would rather crash the train than be safe within the train. So I think that is
the revolutionaries. Oh, is that how it ends?
Yeah.
So that what they take over, and then the whole thing falls apart, and then they all freeze to death in the wilderness.
Basically, so
okay, so it's
the revolution goes from the back of the train where the poor people are to the front where their leads are, and when they get to the front, they yeah. So there are a bit more details, but that is the central message: is we would rather destroy everything to have freedom or justice or equality. Then live with what we have to live with.
Yeah, no, it's a pain. I mean, this is and I mean, I'm baffled because these guys, they're like these technocrats who thrive in areas of high conformity and discipline, and then they're like, yes, but democracy. I'm like, how do you square these two things? I mean, like, your personal sort of workplace proclivities and your desires for functionality should actually indicate it, and the authoritarian culture within the DA should indicate that the ideas that they want to extend to the rest of society should be similarly consonant, but they never are. They're always they're just like, it turns to sort of appeasement and the kid's throwing a tantrum, give him a sweetie kind of a mentality. I'm like, how is it like this? Surely by this point, they've learned from personal experience how an organization is disciplined and can extend it to the rest of society. But they don't. It's so bizarre. They can be as draconian with their own people as possible. I mean, talking to people who go to these meetings and they bring up something negative and everyone shushes them because can't mention anything negative. I mean, it's like that whole thing for that opening paragraph from When Smuts Goes by Arthur Keppel-Jones, where he says, the country's possessed by this pathological optimism that refuses to address any serious risks. And I mean, he's talking from a liberal perspective, and they're worrying about the coming of the National Party. But still, this remains the problem in South Africa. Everyone is still, môre is nog 'n dag en dit kan nie gebeur nie.
Yeah, but that's where I also say that I actually challenge you. You always say that, well, Helen Zille, at least she has good intentions.
I used to think that. I mean, the last grain of that went away when I was researching that piece about the DA's 12-year plan.
Well, it's just the point I want to make about benevolence and good intentions, is that the consequences of it do not make you any less benevolent. Doesn't matter how much, you know, how many corpses there are in the streets. You're still benevolent because that was your intention. So if you judge people by that, then you're always going to ignore
Yeah,
consequences.
I always liked the one phrasing I always liked is that you've got to judge people by the foreseeable consequences of their actions.
Yeah,
So intentions are not the same thing. It's like there's a duty to not be a negligent idiot as
exactly.
well,
That's
and
another thing.
you should have seen this coming. Don't pretend it wasn't baked into the equation.
Yeah, and it's, people forget that manslaughter exists. The history of atrocity is not really murder; it's manslaughter. And
Yeah. People, I mean,
you go to
like
jail for
Bhopal.
manslaughter.
Yeah, I mean, I think of like the Bhopal disaster in India. Dow Chemical blows up a chemical factory and poisons thousands and thousands of people. And their children have birth defects, and the whole place is a wasteland. And you're not going to, you say, oh well, their intentions were good. They were trying to facilitate low-cost consumer goods across the planet that would have raised the standard of living. Isn't this a benefit? I was like, no, it doesn't matter. They killed thousands of people in the most horrific and painful way you can imagine because they were negligent.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter. And I mean, this is what's going to happen with the DA being negligent, not following a sort of being incapable of taking a hard decision about your sentiments and saying, well, to keep these people from having a bad ending, we've got to do something we don't like. But it's the
Exactly, yeah.
responsible way back because it's coming for us, and you got to get ahead of the curve. Because you don't control all of society and all of the future, you control what you control, and you have to get with the times because this is where it's going to go. You got to modernize your thinking. You can't be stuck in 1990 your whole lives.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we have a mountain in front of us, but there's a chance, there's a possibility, and whether or not we succeed, there's always a chance. You always fight back. Just don't stop.
Yeah, and on that
That's why.
encouraging note, shall we
Yeah.
call it a day?
Yeah, fine with me.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the contributions and keeping me on focus. Cheers, man.
Yeah, cheers, man. Thanks for the
Okay.
stream.